She just wanted to rest. But that night, when her neighbor invited her for a helicopter ride over the city, she never imagined that with each meter further from solid ground, the less security she had. Between the roar of the wind and the heat of his gaze, Sarah felt the strange mixture of fear and desire that would dominate her forever. Because in the air, alone with him, she discovered that this man's intentions went far beyond a simple flight, and that falling, perhaps, was inevitable. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to our channel and comment what you thought. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance that no one dared to live. The rain beat against the apartment windows with an almost human insistence, as if it wanted to enter and share the space with Sarah Mitchell. She watched the drops sliding down the glass, forming irregular trails that disappeared into the wooden frame already worn by the ocean salt. 3 weeks had passed since she'd arrived at Lighthouse Peninsula, and she still felt like she was living someone else's life. The apartment was modest, but it had something her old home in New York never possessed: honesty. Each piece of furniture, each crack in the wall, each noise from the wooden floor told a story without lies. It was the opposite of the life she'd built alongside Marcus, where everything was calculated, polished, perfect for appearances, until the day when everything crumbled like a castle of wet cards. Sarah closed her eyes and let the memory come, even though it hurt. The law firm where she worked, the ethics complaint that almost destroyed her career, the suspicions that she had sold privileged information to benefit specific clients. She knew she was innocent, but the forged evidence was too convincing, the enemies too powerful, and the truth seemed irrelevant before the narrative they built against her. Marcus, who should have been her safe harbor, was the first to suggest she step away until the waters calmed, as if his family's reputation was more important than her dignity. The divorce came fast and cruel. She left home with only her clothes and some savings she'd managed to keep in a separate account. The rest stayed behind: the mansion in Westchester, the imported cars, the friends who disappeared like smoke when the scandal broke. But what hurt most was the memory of Laura. Laura Walsh had been her mentor when Sarah was still a young lawyer full of dreams and ideals. A brilliant woman with a natural elegance that impressed any room, married to a man whose name Sarah heard whispered with a mixture of respect and curiosity: Vincent Walsh. Laura had died 5 years ago, under circumstances that newspapers described as domestic accident, but which always left a bitter taste in the mouth of anyone who knew her. A woman so careful, so attentive to details, didn't simply fall from her home's balcony. Sarah never imagined she would end up in the very building where Vincent lived. When the realtor mentioned the name of the upper apartment's owner, she felt her stomach contract, but she had no choice. Her options were limited, and that place by the sea, with a view of the infinite ocean, offered exactly what she needed: anonymity and the chance to rebuild her life away from New York's spotlight. The sound of footsteps in the hallway brought her back to the present. Firm, measured steps that she had already learned to recognize. Vincent Walsh had a particular way of walking, as if each movement was calculated to reveal no more than necessary. In the first days, she had tried to avoid him, leaving home only when she was sure he wasn't around. But it was impossible to escape forever in a building with only 4 apartments. The first encounter happened on a Saturday morning, when she was going down to get mail. He was in the common area, working on something in the elevator control panel, wearing a white shirt that highlighted his tanned skin and jeans that seemed to have been custom-made. When he saw her, he straightened slowly, like a feline evaluating possible prey. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, and it wasn't a question. The voice was deep, velvety, with a soft accent she didn't expect. "You look a lot like her." Sarah felt her heart accelerate. Like who? Like Laura. His eyes were black as coal, impossible to read. "My wife used to talk a lot about you. She said you had potential to change the world." The past came like a blow. "I'm sorry for your loss," she murmured, wishing she could leave immediately. "Thank you." He took a step closer, and Sarah realized he was taller than he seemed from far away. But it wasn't a surprise. Laura always lived dangerously. There was something in the way he said that which made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. Before she could respond, he had already entered the elevator and gone up to his apartment, leaving her alone on the ground floor with 1,000 questions and no answers. In the following days, the encounters became more frequent. Vincent seemed to have developed a supernatural ability to appear exactly when she was leaving or arriving. Always polite, always maintaining a respectful distance, but his eyes devoured her as if she were an enigma he needed to decipher. One afternoon, while she struggled to carry a heavy box of books up the stairs, the elevator was under maintenance. He appeared behind her like a shadow. "Allow me," he said, taking the box from her hands without waiting for an answer. His fingers brushed hers in the process, and Sarah felt an electric shock run up her arm. "Thank you," she murmured, trying to ignore the heat spreading through her chest. "Law books," he observed, looking at the box's contents. "Planning to practice law again?" "I don't know." The answer came out more honest than she intended. "Maybe never again." They climbed the 3 flights in silence, but Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze on her back. When they reached the 2nd floor, he stopped in front of her door and set the box down carefully. "May I ask an indiscreet question?" he said, leaning against the doorframe as if he had all the time in the world. Sarah tensed. "You can try. Why did you come here? To a place where nobody knows you?" "Maybe that's exactly why," she replied, searching for keys in her purse to avoid his gaze. "Or maybe you're running from something." The keys fell to the floor with a metallic noise. Vincent bent down to pick them up, and when he stood up, he was dangerously close to her. Sarah could smell his cologne, a mixture of wood and sea that was completely masculine. "Everyone is running from something," she said, extending her hand for the keys. He didn't hand them over immediately. Instead, he held her wrist gently, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin under her palm. "Some people run away," he murmured, his eyes fixed on hers. "Others run toward danger." "And you?" she asked, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Which way do you run?" A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was loaded with shadows and unfulfilled promises. "I stopped running," he said, placing the keys in her palm and closing her fingers around the metal. "And wait." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stayed on the balcony, watching the sea under the moonlight, trying to understand what was happening to her. It wasn't just physical attraction, although that certainly existed. It was something deeper, more dangerous. Vincent Walsh carried secrets like a man carries scars, and she felt irresistibly attracted to both. That's when she noticed the light on in his apartment, on the floor above. His silhouette appeared at the window, and for a moment, they observed each other across the distance. Sarah knew she should go inside, close the curtains, pretend nothing was happening. But she couldn't move. Vincent raised one of his hands in a gesture that could be a greeting or an invitation. Sarah felt her heart race and, before she could censor herself, returned the gesture. They stayed like that for long minutes, 2 strangers connected by darkness and solitude, until he finally moved away from the window. The next morning, Sarah found a note that had been slipped under her door during the night. The handwriting was elegant, masculine. "Sunday, 2 p.m., helipad on the roof. I'd like to show you the peninsula from a different perspective. V." Sarah read the note 3 times before realizing she was holding her breath. A helicopter ride. With Vincent. Alone in the air, away from everything and everyone. All the alarm sirens in her head screamed for her to refuse. This man was an unknown, possibly dangerous, and carried a painful connection to her past. Besides, she barely knew him. Accepting an invitation like that went against all her self-preservation instincts. But there was something stronger than fear. Hunger. A hunger to feel alive again. To take risks. To find something worthwhile amid the wreckage of her previous life. It had been a long time since Sarah felt blood running hot in her veins, her heart accelerating for something beyond fear or anguish. On Saturday night, she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The face that stared back was different from what she saw weeks ago. Her eyes had recovered a brightness she thought she'd lost forever. Her cheeks were flushed, not from wine or makeup, but from an expectation she hadn't felt in years. "You're crazy," she said to her reflection. Completely crazy. But on Sunday morning, she found herself choosing her outfit carefully. Nothing too obvious, nothing that screamed, "I dressed up for you," but also nothing that made her look careless. She opted for a navy blue dress that highlighted her eyes and a leather jacket that made her feel a little more courageous. At exactly 2 p.m., she was on the rooftop helipad. The ocean wind whipped her hair, and the sound of the already running blades made her heart vibrate in her chest. Vincent was beside the aircraft, checking some equipment. When he saw her arrive, he stopped what he was doing and observed her for a long moment. "You came," he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Did you doubt it? I thought common sense would speak louder." Sarah smiled, feeling unexpected courage take hold of her. "Maybe common sense is overrated." He laughed, and it was the first genuinely happy sound she'd heard from him. "In that case, welcome to the wild side." Vincent helped her climb into the helicopter, his hands firm on her waist as she settled into the co-pilot seat. When he sat beside her and began working the controls, Sarah realized the reality of what was happening. She was a few meters above the ground, in a machine commanded by a man she barely knew, about to fly over the ocean with no guarantee she would return safe and sound. And for the first time in a long time, she felt exactly where she should be. "Ready?" Vincent asked, his hand hovering over the final controls. Sarah looked at him, at the challenging smile playing on his lips, at the eyes that promised adventures and dangers in equal measure. "Ready," she replied, and the helicopter began to rise, taking them away from solid ground and into something neither of them could name yet. The world transformed into a tapestry of blues and greens when the helicopter gained altitude. Sarah felt her stomach contract, not just from the sensation of being suspended in air, but from Vincent's proximity. He piloted with a naturalness that spoke of years of experience, precise and confident movements, as if that machine were an extension of his own body. "First time?" he asked through the headphones, his voice too intimate in that confined space. "In a helicopter?" "Yes." Sarah tried to maintain a casual tone, but her breathing was accelerated. "Have you been flying for long?" "Since I was 20. I was an Air Force pilot before." He paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Before other responsibilities took over my life." Sarah wanted to ask more, but something in the rigidity of his shoulders made her hesitate. Instead, she let herself be fascinated by the view unfolding below. Lighthouse Peninsula seemed even wilder from above, with its cliffs cutting the ocean like ancient scars and houses scattered like small dots of color amid the green native vegetation. "It's breathtaking," she murmured, genuinely touched by the raw beauty of the landscape. "Laura used to say you only really know a place when you see it from above," Vincent commented, slightly altering the route to follow the coastline. "She loved flying with me." The deceased wife's name brought sudden tension to the environment. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, a strange mixture of guilt and jealousy she couldn't rationally explain. "Did you fly together often?" "Almost every weekend." His voice became lower, loaded with memories. "It was our moment to escape the world below." She said that in the air she felt free from expectations, from people who always wanted something from her. Sarah knew that feeling well. Laura Walsh had been one of the country's most respected lawyers, a woman who navigated with elegance through the most exclusive circles of American society. But Sarah remembered the moments when she saw her alone in the office, late at night, when she thought no one was watching. There was a deep melancholy in those green eyes, as if she carried a weight that no one else could see. "She was special," Sarah said softly. "She changed my life." Vincent turned his head to look at her, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable in his face. "How so?" "When I was a young, idealistic lawyer, full of dreams of justice and social change, Laura taught me that the real world is much more complicated than books make it seem. But she also taught me that doesn't mean we should stop fighting." "And did you stop fighting?" The question came like a sharp blade, cutting directly into the center of the wound Sarah was trying to hide. She remained silent for a long moment, watching the waves break against the rocks below. "Not exactly," she finally replied. "But I learned that sometimes we fight the wrong enemies." Vincent slowed the helicopter, making a smooth turn that took them away from the inhabited coast. Sarah realized they were heading toward a wilder part of the peninsula, where there were no houses or roads, just dense vegetation and steep cliffs. "Where are we going?" she asked, a pang of apprehension mixed with excitement. "There's a place I want to show you. A place that was special to Laura and that, well, I think you should know about." Something in his tone made Sarah alert. There was an intensity in his voice that wasn't there before, an urgency that made her question for the first time if she had made the right decision accepting that invitation. 15 minutes later, Vincent began descending toward a rocky plateau on top of an isolated cliff. The place was of wild and intimidating beauty. On one side, dense Atlantic forest vegetation. On the other, a vertiginous precipice that fell directly into the ocean. It was impossible to reach there by car or on foot. "My God," Sarah whispered when the helicopter touched the ground and Vincent turned off the engine. "It's as if we're the only people in the world." "Exactly." He removed his headphones and turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "Laura discovered this place during one of our first trips together. She said it was the only place on Earth where she felt completely free." They exited the aircraft in silence, and Sarah was immediately struck by the force of the ocean wind. Her hair flew around her face, and she had to hold down her dress skirt to prevent it from lifting. Vincent watched her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through all her defenses. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "I want to show you the view." Sarah hesitated for a moment. There was something in the way he looked at her, a barely disguised hunger that made her tremble inside. But curiosity and desire overcame prudence, and she placed her hand in his. The touch was electric. His fingers were calloused, strong, and when they closed around hers, Sarah felt a wave of heat rise up her arm. Vincent led her to the edge of the cliff, where the world simply ended in an abyss of air and foam. "It's vertigo-inducing," she murmured, instinctively stepping back. "Don't be afraid." His voice was right behind her, low and comforting. "I won't let you fall." But when Sarah turned to look at him, she saw something in his eyes that contradicted his words. There was a darkness there, an intensity that made her realize he might be exactly the person most likely to make her fall. "Vincent," she began, but he took a step closer, invading her personal space in a way that was both intimidating and magnetic. "You know there are things about you that I know, don't you?" he said, his voice low and controlled. "Things you think you buried along with your previous life." Sarah's blood froze. "What are you talking about?" "The scandal at the firm, the corruption accusations, the money that disappeared from client accounts." Each word was spoken with surgical precision, as if he were dissecting a piece of evidence. "Did you really think nobody else knew the truth?" Sarah felt her legs go weak. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" He took an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket and extended it to her. "Maybe this will refresh your memory." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents she thought had been destroyed. Bank transfers, internal emails, call records, all the evidence that had been used to destroy her career, but also other things. Documents she had never seen before, that seemed to complete a puzzle she didn't even know existed. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice coming out as a whisper. "Laura left me everything. She was investigating the same scheme that destroyed you. Actually, she was close to exposing the real culprits when..." He paused, his jaw contracted. "When she died." Sarah looked up from the papers to stare at him. "Are you saying Laura was murdered?" "I'm saying my wife wasn't the type to stumble and fall from her home's balcony." His voice was loaded with pain he tried to disguise with anger. "And I'm saying you might have been the real reason she died." The world spun around Sarah. She leaned against a nearby rock, trying to process what she was hearing. "You think that I had something to do with Laura's death?" "No. I think Laura died because she was trying to clear your name." Vincent moved even closer, and now she could see the small lines of suffering around his eyes. "The same men who destroyed your life killed my wife because she had discovered the truth." "What truth?" "That you were used as a scapegoat in a much larger scheme. That very powerful men were stealing millions from workers' pension funds and needed someone to take the blame when everything came to light." Sarah felt the ground move under her feet. It wasn't just the strong wind or proximity to the cliff. It was the realization that her life had been shattered not by her own actions, but by being a pawn in a game much larger than she imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Because I need your help." For the first time since they left the helicopter, Vincent seemed uncertain. "The men who killed Laura are still out there. They have power, money, connections. I can't defeat them alone." "And you think I can?" "I think we can together." He extended his hand again, but this time it wasn't just an invitation to walk. It was an invitation to something much more dangerous. "But I need to know if I can trust you." Sarah looked at the extended hand, at his face marked by pain and determination. at the documents she still held that changed everything she thought she knew about her own life. The wind continued howling around them, carrying the salty smell of the sea and the promise of storm. "If I accept this," she said slowly, "there will be no going back, will there?" "No," he replied with brutal honesty. "If you come with me on this journey, your life will never be the same. We might not survive." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the wind lash her face. When she opened them again, there was new determination in her gaze. "Then tell me one thing," she said, taking a step closer to him. "All of this, bringing me here, showing me these documents, was it planned from the beginning?" Vincent didn't look away. "Yes. And what's happening between us? Is that also part of your plan?" For a long moment they stared at each other. The wind howled around them, and the sound of waves breaking against the rocks below seemed like a soundtrack for the moment of truth unfolding. "No," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "That's the only thing I didn't plan." Before Sarah could respond, Vincent stepped forward and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle or hesitant kiss. It was a hungry, desperate kiss, loaded with all the tension that had been building between them since their first encounter. Sarah felt her defenses crumble like sand walls before a tsunami. She returned the kiss with an intensity that surprised her, her hands clinging to his shirt as if it were the only thing preventing her from falling off the cliff. She could feel the heat of his body through the fabric, the slightly salty taste of his lips, the contained strength in his hands that pressed her against him. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Sarah could feel his heart beating rapidly against her chest, and knew hers was doing the same. "Sarah," he whispered, her name coming out like a prayer. "I know," she replied, though she didn't know exactly what she was agreeing to. "I know." He embraced her then, and they stayed like that for a long time, two bodies warming each other against the cold ocean wind. Sarah could feel his vulnerability through the embrace, the way he held on to her as if she were his anchor in a world that had lost all meaning with Laura's death. "We should go back," Vincent murmured against her hair. "It's getting late and there will be a storm tonight." Sarah nodded but didn't pull away immediately. There was something about that moment, about that place where the world ended in an abyss of air and foam, that made her want to keep every second in memory. "Vincent," she said when they finally separated, "if we're going to do this, if we're going after the truth about Laura and what happened to me, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll be honest with me. Completely honest. I can't enter a war fighting alongside someone I can't fully trust." He looked into her eyes for a long moment. "I can promise I'll be as honest as possible, but there are things about me, about my past, that you might find difficult to accept." "Like what?" "Like the fact that I'm not exactly the respectable businessman I pretend to be. Like the fact that I've done things to discover the truth about Laura's death that—" "Well, that could technically be considered illegal." Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the wind. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things people like us shouldn't know how to do." He touched her face gently. "But that are sometimes necessary when you're dealing with monsters." The flight back was made in silence, loaded with tension. Sarah watched the landscape moving below, but her mind was 1,000 miles away, processing everything that had happened that afternoon. Her life had been turned upside down once again. But this time, strangely, she felt more in control than she had in a long time. When they landed on the rooftop helipad, the sky was already darkening with heavy rain clouds. Vincent helped her out of the aircraft, and when her feet touched solid ground again, Sarah felt as if she were returning from a journey much longer than a few hours. "So," Vincent said, his hand still on her waist, "what's your answer?" Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing reflected there all the dangerous possibilities opening before them. She knew she was about to make a decision that would change everything, that would take her down a path from which there might be no return. "My answer," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice, "is yes." And as the first raindrops began to fall, sealing the agreement between them, Sarah realized that for the first time since her life fell apart, she felt truly alive. The storm Vincent had predicted arrived during the early morning hours, bringing with it wind gusts that made the building's windows tremble in their frames. Sarah had been awake for hours, lying in bed, watching lightning illuminate the room in white and frightening flashes. Each thunder seemed to echo the decision she had made that afternoon, reverberating through her body like a promise that there was no going back. The kiss still burned on her lips. She kept running her fingers over them repeatedly, trying to capture the sensation of that masculine mouth, desperate and hungry, that had awakened something in her she thought was dead forever. Vincent Walsh was a dangerous man. She knew that now with absolute certainty. But there was something about him that attracted her like a magnet, a darkness that mirrored her own. At 3 a.m, when the rain finally diminished to a persistent drizzle, Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. Steps she would recognize anywhere. Firm, measured, deliberate. Vincent was awake too, probably tormented by the same thoughts that kept her awake. A soft knock on the door made her jump from bed. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks. As if it were a code, Sarah put on a robe over her silk nightgown and walked to the door, her heart beating like a war drum. "Who is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "It's me." Vincent's voice from the other side of the door was low, intimate. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Sarah opened the door and found him leaning against the frame, wearing only dark jeans and a white shirt partially unbuttoned. His hair was damp, as if he had showered recently, and there was an intensity in his eyes that made her tremble inside. "Did something happen?" she asked, pulling the robe tighter around her body. "May I come in?" He looked over her shoulder, as if checking whether anyone else was watching. "It's not safe to talk in the hallway." Sarah hesitated for just a second before stepping aside, allowing him to enter. Vincent closed the door behind him and locked it, the metallic sound echoing in the apartment's silence. "I received a call," he said without preamble, walking to the window and looking out through the curtains. "From someone who shouldn't know I'm investigating Laura's death." Sarah felt her blood freeze. What kind of call? The kind that serves as a warning. Vincent turned to face her, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. "They know about you, Sarah. They know you're here. They know we talked. They know we went flying together today. How is that possible? Because they're very good at what they do. And because..." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "Because I think we've been watched longer than I imagined." Sarah approached him, ignoring the voice of reason screaming to keep her distance. "What exactly did they say?" "That it would be a shame if something happened to the new tenant. That accidents happen very frequently in isolated places like Lighthouse Peninsula." His eyes were hard as stone. "And that I should remember what happened to my dear Laura when I started asking too many questions." Fear spread through Sarah's chest like liquid ice. "They killed her. They really killed Laura." "Yes." The word came out as a whisper loaded with pain. "And they'll kill you too if we're not careful." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly weak. "Maybe I should leave. Get out of the city, the country if necessary. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." "No." Vincent crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "You won't run again. This time we fight." "But what if..." "Sarah." He pronounced her name like a caress, his thumbs gently rubbing her knuckles. "I've spent 5 years looking for the truth about Laura's death. 5 years living like a ghost, haunted by unanswered questions. You're the first real clue I've found, the first chance to get justice for her. What if I'm killed in the process? What if you're killed?" Vincent released one of her hands and touched her face gently. "Then at least we'll die fighting for the truth." That's more than most people can say. There was something in the way he touched her, an almost religious reverence, that made Sarah's heart accelerate for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and feeling the rough skin of his palm against her cheek. "Vincent," she whispered, and couldn't continue. "I know," he replied, as he had done at the cliff. "I feel it too." When Sarah opened her eyes, she found his fixed on her face, studying every detail as if he wanted to memorize everything. The tension between them was almost tangible, a thread stretched to its maximum that threatened to break at any moment. "This is madness," she murmured, but didn't pull away. "Life itself is madness." Vincent leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "The question is, do you want to live this madness alone, or do you want someone to share the insanity?" Before Sarah could respond, he kissed her again. But this time it was different from the urgent and desperate kiss at the cliff. This was slow, exploratory, as if he were savoring every second. Sarah felt herself melting against him, all the defenses she had built over the years shattering like crystal. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer until she slipped from the edge of the bed and knelt on the floor with him. The robe opened slightly, revealing the silk nightgown underneath, and Sarah saw his eyes darken when he realized how little she was wearing. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse with desire, "if we don't stop now." "I don't want to stop," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I don't want to stop anymore." Vincent groaned softly and pulled her to him, kissing her with a passion that stole all the air from her lungs. His hands explored the curves of her body through the fine silk, and Sarah felt liquid heat spreading through her veins. How long had it been since she felt desired like this? How long since she desired someone with this intensity that bordered on obsession? They moved together, like dancers following an ancestral choreography, until Sarah found herself lying on the bed with Vincent leaning over her. His shirt had disappeared at some point during the journey, and she could see the scars decorating his tanned chest, marks of a life lived dangerously. "These scars," she whispered, tracing an irregular line that ran from his shoulder to his heart. "How did you get them?" "Some in the Air Force. Others—" He captured her hand and kissed it. "Others looking for the truth about Laura." Sarah felt an irrational pang of jealousy. Even dead, Laura was still present between them, like a ghost that refused to leave. But before she could let herself be consumed by this feeling, Vincent kissed her again, and all rational thought was swept away by the tide of sensations he awakened in her body. They made love with an urgency that spoke of limited time, of imminent dangers, of the need to connect before the world conspired to separate them again. Sarah surrendered completely, allowing Vincent to take her to places she had forgotten existed. When they finally collapsed in each other's arms, exhausted and satisfied, the first ray of morning sun was already filtering through the curtains. Vincent held her against his chest, his fingers playing distractedly with her hair. Sarah could hear his heart beating under her ear, strong and steady like a metronome. "I don't regret it," she said softly. "Neither do I." He kissed the top of her head. "But this makes everything more complicated." "How so?" "Because now it's not just about justice for Laura. Now it's about protecting you too. And men in love make mistakes." Sarah raised her head to look at him. "Are you in love?" Vincent stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I'm starting to think so, and that scares me more than any death threat." Before Sarah could respond, his phone rang. Vincent frowned. It was only 6 in the morning. He reached for the device on the nightstand and answered cautiously. "Hello?" Sarah watched his face change, the expression shifting from caution to something much more dangerous. "I understand," he said, his voice cold as ice. "And you're sure about this?" "Yes, I'll be there." He hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face. "What was it?" Sarah asked, a sense of dread forming in her stomach. "That was my contact at the police. They found a body this morning, washed up on the North Beach." Vincent turned to look at her, his eyes somber. "George Martinez, the doorman from our building." Sarah felt the world spin. George was the gentleman who always greeted her with a smile, who had commented on how she looked like someone he knew. Presumably Laura. How did he die? Officially, accidental drowning. Apparently he went fishing during the storm and was swept away by the waves. Vincent got up and began dressing with precise and controlled movements. But George grew up on this coast. He knew the sea better than any professional fisherman. He would never have gone out during a storm. They killed him because he knew something, or because they suspected he might tell us something. Vincent finished buttoning his shirt and turned to her. "Sarah, we need to get out of here today." "Where to?" "I have a safe house inland, a place where we can hide while we plan our next move." He approached the bed and held her face in his hands. "But I need you to trust me completely. The next few hours will be the most dangerous." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the terror spreading through her chest. "What do you need me to do?" "Pack quickly, just the essentials, and if anyone comes here before I get back, don't open the door for anything in this world." "Where are you going?" "To get some things from my apartment. Documents, money, weapons." The last word was said so naturally that Sarah almost didn't register it. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. He kissed her quickly, a kiss that tasted like goodbye, and left the apartment. Sarah heard his footsteps moving away down the hallway, followed by the sound of the elevator going up. She got up from bed and ran to the closet, throwing clothes into a small suitcase without much ceremony. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She had made love with Vincent, surrendered completely to a man she barely knew, and now she was fleeing from assassins who had killed at least 2 people. When she was closing the suitcase, she heard a sound that made her freeze. Footsteps in the hallway. But they weren't Vincent's measured and familiar steps. They were multiple sets of footsteps, trying to be silent and failing. Sarah ran to the window and looked outside. A black car was parked on the street with 2 men in suits beside it. They weren't even trying to hide. A knock on the door made her jump. It wasn't Vincent's 3 soft knocks. It was an authoritative, impatient knock. "Ms. Mitchell," a male voice called from the hallway. "FBI, we need to speak with you." Sarah knew it wasn't true. Vincent had said the local police found George's body, not the FBI. And even if it were true, they wouldn't come looking for her so early, not without more evidence. She grabbed her cell phone and dialed Vincent's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. Either he was too busy to answer, or the knock on the door repeated, louder this time. "Ms. Mitchell, we know you're in there. Please open the door. We don't want to have to break it down." Sarah looked around the apartment desperately, searching for an exit. The window faced a cliff. There was no escape that way. The only exit was the front door, where the men were waiting for her. That's when she remembered. Vincent had mentioned a safe house inland. But how would she get there if she couldn't leave the apartment? The answer came in the form of a familiar sound from outside, the roar of a helicopter engine. Sarah ran to the window and saw Vincent's aircraft hovering over the building. He was on the rooftop helipad waiting for her. But to get there, she would have to get past the men in the hallway. The sound of metal being forced came from the door. They were trying to break the lock. Sarah grabbed her suitcase and ran to the kitchen, where there was a service door that led to the emergency staircase. It was her only chance. When the front door finally gave way and the men invaded the apartment, Sarah was already climbing the rusty metal staircase on the outside of the building, the ocean wind whipping her hair and the heavy suitcase in one hand. 3 floors up, Vincent's helicopter waited for her like a winged horse ready to take her away from that nightmare. But when she finally reached the helipad, breathless and terrified, Vincent wasn't alone. A middle-aged man, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was beside the aircraft with a gun pointed at Vincent's head. "Ah, Ms. Mitchell," the man said when he saw her. "Good that you could join us. We have a lot to talk about."